Okay, hello and good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to have Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us this week to give us a brief update on the top events currently going on in Israel this week. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. If you should wish to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. There's really only one place to start this week, and that is the ongoing negotiations for the next hostage deal. Things are moving extremely quickly. They started on Friday with the now famous speech given by President Biden, basically laying out what he described as an Israeli offer, which included a couple of phases. Interesting, first thing to note, which is very interesting, the fact that it took place on a Friday. I believe it was already when Shabbat was in Israel, which gave the speech a lot of time to percolate, because the biggest naysayers to the speech would have been the religious right in Israel and their elected representatives and their members of the cabinet, which would be led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. Obviously, as they are religious people and they keep Shabbat. In fact, all the leaders of all the parties outside the Likud in the cabinet, obviously also leaving Benny Gantz out for the moment, are people who keep Shabbat. So it gave a little bit of wiggle room for this speech to be left without any sort of, let's say, negative response. We can argue whether that was timed intentionally or not. Usually these things are very carefully calibrated, and I'll leave it at that. It's very interesting that it was presented as an Israeli proposal, and basically challenging President Biden challenged Hamas to get on board. Early this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke at a behind closed doors hearing of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, where he basically said that President Biden's outline is incomplete. The most important part of it, there were two phases. The first phase would see women, young soldiers, the elderly, the infirm, the ill released for quite a lot of hardened terrorists. And then there would be a transition from phase one to phase two. The big debate, as we see it, is over the sort of now infamous Clause 14. What does it mean? It was really written, and anyone who's ever been involved in negotiations and diplomacy knows that sometimes you make things extremely apparent, extremely clear, and sometimes you leave them sufficiently vague or ambiguous, allowing both sides to take what they want out of it at this stage and perhaps to argue about it later, or allow both sides a win, or whatever it is. This is what happened in this particular case. Clause 14 could be read in a number of different ways. It basically leaves the transition between the two phases, and whether we are talking about, and this is the most important sticking point between the two parties still, is whether there will be, at the end of the temporary ceasefire, it will turn into something more permanent or not. Israel has said, or Prime Minister Netanyahu has said many, many times, he will not end the war without reaching his war aims, which have been consistent from the beginning. The destruction or removal of Hamas as a military and governing body, and its ability, or any group's ability, to threaten Israel from the Gaza Strip. And Netanyahu was very strong again about that, and claiming that there is nothing in this agreement that prevents him from reaching those goals. Obviously, the reading from the other side could be different, and it was written in a way to give Hamas some wiggle room that maybe they could come to the table. We can talk about that in a moment, but it clearly was written in a way for the for the proposal to be brought up. President Biden would certainly not have given such a speech if we didn't have the agreement, not just of Netanyahu, but of the war cabinet. As we know, the three voting members of the war cabinet are Prime Minister Netanyahu himself, Defense Minister Gallant, and Minister Benny Gantz. So it's clear that the proposal met with a tacit approval. But as one can imagine, when hearing about this, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich came out and said that this is extremely problematic and they will not agree to it. They are both members of the Security Cabinet, which is a wider cabinet, but not one that has been referred to as often as they would like. They would both like to see, Ben-Gvir certainly has been extremely vocal about it. They would both like to see themselves having a seat at the real decision-making table, which is the war cabinet. Ben-Gvir went so far as to say, to demand to see the agreement with his own eyes, because there is all this back and forth and some of the elements have not been released and some of the wording, etc., etc. So he demanded to see the agreement for himself. He understood that he would be allowed to see it. When he got to Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, he was told he would not be able to see it. And in fact, apparently even came back another time when he was again promised to see the agreement and again was not allowed to see the agreement. Ben-Gvir is basically threatened at this point not to support the government in any upcoming Knesset votes, which is a little bit hollow. It's more of a threat in name only, because next week is Shavuot and there aren't really too many important laws that are coming up before then. So gives at least a week, if not more, for Netanyahu to act without really any great threat to his coalition majority. The fact is, though, that if this proposal does go through as it stands, it's very probable that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich will leave. In fact, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have gone as far as to say that they don't just have a problem with the transition to phase 2 and phase 2 itself, but also phase 1. They do not agree with the release of life-serving terrorists, because that's what in the proposal that I believe up to 150 life-serving terrorists, in other words, terrorists with blood on their hands, will be released for the five famous Israeli observers who are border observers who were kidnapped on October 7th, and they are against phase 1 apparently. So there's a lot to be worked out, but what is clear is Netanyahu is really trying to navigate that tightrope. On the one hand, he has Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, which he will need if Benny Gantz goes through with his threat from a couple of weeks ago that he will leave the government by June 8th. As you can see by from the calendar, he only has a couple of days to fulfill that demand. But the analysis is that he will still leave, but Netanyahu, I'm sure, will try and convince him to stay with a few little tricks that he may have left. But let's just say he does leave, then either Ben-Gvir or Smotrich on their own, let alone the two of them together, if they leave, then simply Netanyahu does not have a majority. If he needs a majority for the hostage deal, Yair Lapid has said that there is a majority in the Knesset. Obviously, Gantz will support it. Even from the outside, Lapid said he will support it, but obviously neither will support the continuation of this government. So that's what Netanyahu is looking at. That's why he's trying as much as possible to push things down the road as much as possible, to hope, or maybe not, that Sinwar will reject the agreement. At the moment, there hasn't been a definitive answer for Hamas. There's been a lot of talk, as there is, from all the different elements, most of them Hamas leaders outside of the Strip. They are still maintaining this idea that they need a full and permanent ceasefire. In fact, some of them are even saying they need a full ceasefire even before the agreement takes effect, which obviously is a non-starter from Israel's point of view. But the fact remains that Hamas have not responded. There's a lot of pressure on them. There's not much optimism in Israel that Sinwar will respond positively. But there is a lot of pressure led by the Americans on the Qataris, on the Egyptians, even on the Turks, anyone who could then put a certain amount of pressure on Hamas. America is clearly putting a lot behind it. It clearly believes that they can make a deal somehow, and they really want this deal. It's again, we'll have to see exactly if Hamas accepts the deal in any way, shape, or form, what that could mean for the future of this government. Again, we have to wait and see exactly what happens with Gantz, but it could be this time next week we will be talking about a government of 64. Just as importantly, and what has certainly come up in the last few days, is intensification of attacks from the north, and the question and the quandary of Hezbollah. There was a massive fire at the beginning of the week which took up a lot of dunams of Israeli land in the north. The pictures that came out, the fire that couldn't be put out for 24 hours or more, certainly got a lot of people talking about the lack of deterrence by Israel in the north. Israel still has 120,000 Israelis who have not been able to return to their homes. And just earlier today, there was an attack by a suicide drone on an Israeli civilian community, which is certainly an intensification, and 11 people are injured and at least one seriously injured. The question remains, and the question that's being debated at the moment in the Security Cabinet is, again, which has always been since the beginning, is not necessarily if, but when. The truth is there is still a discussion of if. When should Israel launch an attack against Hezbollah? What should that look like? There are many in the security forces who are basically saying, let's first of all finish Rafah. That's the last major place that needs to be conquered. Not to say that other areas are not flaring up, but the last major area that still needs to be conquered in Gaza. There's a suggestion that will still take around a month, and then that can free up a lot of soldiers then to be facing north. There have been call-up papers given out in the last couple of days for tens of thousands of Israeli reservists, which has certainly got a lot of people in the region talking that is preparing for war. And the question is also if they should go to war now, if they should wait till the end of the fighting in Gaza, if they should still put some emphasis on diplomatic negotiations, which are still going on, led by American official Amos Hochstein. And the other question that some are asking in Israel, especially amongst defense experts, is what should the level of Israel's attack be? Should it just attack Hezbollah? Should it also attack Lebanon, as it's threatened to do a number of occasions over the years since the Second Lebanon War? The advantages, as they were, that have been suggested is Hezbollah can take a mighty blow to their own forces. It will be difficult to fight Hezbollah, much harder than it will be to fight Hamas. It can't do, if it's just targeting Hezbollah, it won't be able to do as much as it did, obviously, in Gaza. And also Hezbollah could have a lot more fighters, have a lot more armory. They can make Israel bleed a lot more. We're talking about tens of thousands of rockets that can reach every single inch of territory. These are ballistic missiles, far more dangerous than anything Hamas have. So certainly it would be a far, far more deadly war, bloody war, more painful war on both sides. But the idea of attacking Lebanon or Lebanese infrastructure is to make Hezbollah look bad in the eyes of Lebanon, the Lebanese people. Lebanese officials, especially those who are against Hezbollah in Lebanon, internally have come out against Hezbollah. A lot more voices are warning Hezbollah, do not allow this war to happen. And the more that Israel would attack Lebanese infrastructure, maybe it's electricity plants, maybe it's airports or what have you, that could put the necessary pressure on someone like Nasrallah, who claims to be a Lebanese patriot. He's not just interested in surviving, he's interested in continuing his power within Lebanon. But the more the people would turn against him, the worse it would be in Lebanon. So there are those voices who are saying in the security analysts field, who are saying if we attack, we have to attack wider than Hezbollah. We have to, or Israel has to attack where it will hurt the Lebanese people, who could then blame Hezbollah and turn on them. Obviously, the US has given its messages that it will not allow such things to happen. And obviously, with significant armaments coming from the US, Israel obviously has to take that into account. But the US will not allow probably the vast majority of attacks on general Lebanese infrastructure. So that will certainly have to be taken into account when the security officials make their calculations. The final question is, what could this war achieve? It's not going to be as simple as just destroying Hezbollah. We've seen how difficult it is to destroy Hamas after 8 months. Hezbollah is a whole different concept, they're a proper army with proper resources. They can probably invade the north of Israel tomorrow significantly with their highly trained Radwan forces. And the question is, could Israel significantly weaken Hezbollah during this war? Or, as some would suggest, are we just fighting until we can get to an agreement? So it's maybe preferable just to try and get to the agreement up front without any more loss of life on either side. So this is the big quandary of Lebanon, which is the focus for many. Some, as I said, in the security officialdom are saying, let's finish Gaza first. Some are saying it's too late. It's far beyond that. Hezbollah have been intensifying these attacks. Israel is losing its deterrence. Israel is not being able to return its citizens to the north. The north is burning. It is time for Israel to turn around and basically return deterrence to the north. So these are all questions that are being asked. There's a lot of it being affected by, as I said, political forces. Does Gantz stay in? Does he stay out? Does Smotrich stay? Does Smotrich go? Ben-Gvir? What is the agreement? Does Hamas say yes or no? All of these things are deeply intertwined, and we'll perhaps get some answers in the weeks ahead. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you for the update, Ashley. The first question is about the proposed plan from President Biden. The proposal includes the condition of withdrawal from Israel, from Gaza, and an end to the war, but also includes the condition that Hamas may no longer remain in power. How can the removal of Hamas under these terms be guaranteed if Israel is made to withdraw their operations? It kind of suggests that Israel will have to put out 80% of the fire, so to speak.
Well, yes, again, that just speaks to the ambiguity. First of all, it doesn't say that there will be a permanent ceasefire. It says that there'll be negotiations towards a ceasefire if there's no more flare-up. But again, there are some who are banking on Sinwar, allowing some sort of flare-up, or maybe there'll be some justification for Israel to attack Hamas in that intermediate period. So it's not exactly clear. And again, there is that sufficient ambiguity in the text that allows not just the feeling that Hamas will not be there after the day after it. If Hamas are not defeated militarily, then they'll simply still be there the day after. And in fact, there is obviously a certain amount of confidence from Hamas, because in the middle of June, they are meeting with Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, in China for negotiations. Once again, there's not too much optimism there'll be some sort of agreement, but it's clear that there are significant elements in Hamas which are trying to prepare for the day after. So there is this belief within Hamas that they will survive this, and they will continue in some respect to govern, whether that is openly as Hamas, whether it's in some sort of national unity Palestinian government, whether it's behind the scenes, whatever, what have you. These are obviously details that need to be worked out. Again, we don't know the exact and full text of the agreement, and we certainly see a lot of ambiguities in it. So it's hard to say exactly what will be in the agreement without seeing all the different clauses.
All right, thank you. Now we have a question from Don Sable, who asks, please comment on Egypt as a peace partner and the Israeli-Egyptian relationship after the numerous tunnels were found going from Rafah into Egypt.
Well, yes, it's obviously extremely fraught at this point in time. On the one hand, Egypt wouldn't lose any sleep if Hamas were destroyed. This current regime in Egypt is certainly no fan of the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is the Palestinian wing. On the other hand, it's clear that under their nose, significant tens of tunnels that they're now talking about. Last week was only 20, but they're now talking about tens of tunnels were built from Rafah into Egypt. Whether that was done with the knowledge of the central government or not, that's a debate to be had. Clearly, there was not enough oversight. It's embarrassing for Egypt and Egypt are trying to distract this by demanding that Israel remove itself from the Rafah crossing and allowing aid in. Israel has said that there's no problem, aid can continue coming in from them. So Egypt are trying to distract and deflect a little bit from this. It's clear that the relations are fraught, but they have not got to a point where Israel and Egypt are still not coordinating, still not working together on some level, because they are still mediators, and Israel and Egypt have to ensure that there's no spillover of the Israel-Hamas war into Egyptian territory. Neither side want that at all. So the relationship is low, but the relationships are ongoing, simply out of necessity at this point.
And to tag on to that last question, maybe there's a relationship here. Eric asks, why is Egypt stopping the movement of humanitarian aid into Gaza?
Well, it simply wants to push Israel back from Rafah. They're not happy about this. Let's not forget that Rafah touches Egypt. Israel is now on the border of Egypt and Gaza. It's not a situation Egypt wanted. Egypt wanted full control, and they didn't want Israel on the other side. It doesn't look good for them that Egypt is sending in aid, which is then received by Israeli parties and then handed over to international organizations. Israel has said it's fine by them. It embarrasses Egypt, and Egypt's definitely not happy about it. And that's why they continue to say, even though the Americans are trying to put pressure on them, that they will not send any more aid through Rafah until Israel moves itself from the crossing.
Right. Now, I wanted to go back to something you had mentioned earlier pertaining to the assault from Hezbollah in the north of Israel. Now, assuming this continues at the scale of destruction that it has been, do you think Israel will be forced to focus its capabilities completely away from Gaza and the other fronts of the war and focus on Lebanon? And if so, what will that mean for the future of Gaza and Hamas?
I don't think there's any possibility of a full attention on the north, because the south will require attention, according to Tzachi Negbi, for quite a long time. He's saying the war will go on until next year at least. Probably it will look very different once Israel, as I said, has finished Rafah, which has been a guesstimate is around a month. Then, even then, that Israel's now, in theory, conquered all the main population centers. It's clear that Hamas still have pockets of resistance around the Strip, and Israel is still in various other places around the Strip fighting, isolated sometimes. Attacks by Hamas. So Israel will not be able to leave Gaza completely for quite a while until some sort of peacekeeping, rehabilitation, whatever that looks like. That's the question for the day after plan. In the proposal itself, it does talk about the day after a little bit, and he'll come in. And that's something that certainly Israel will have to weigh up. But are they going to come in while there's still Israeli military inside? That's a big question. That will obviously be very problematic. But it's clear that the major threat today is from the north. The south, at this point in time, is not a grave threat to Israel. Israel is just intent as much as possible in trying to clear up as much Hamas fighters and battalions as possible. But Gaza at this point doesn't pose a great threat. Yes, there may be rockets here and there, but we will not see October 7th type attacks while the Israeli army is within Gaza, and probably, I don't want to say never, but not for the foreseeable future. But the threat is certainly there, and far greater on the northern border. There has always been the fear of October 7th type attacks in the northern border. Hezbollah have said this openly, and there's a fear that if we attack Hezbollah, that the Radwan forces, which are far more trained soldiers, sophisticated elite soldiers than anything Hamas have, could easily infiltrate Israel, take over a town or two. And one can imagine, even though some of those towns are evacuated, that would certainly be a major blow to Israel. And that's not even talking about Hezbollah's massive missile arsenal, which it holds on to. It has tens of thousands of precise rockets, ballistic missiles, and it can really, really do a lot of damage to Israel. So really, the greatest threat at the moment on the map, with all the other threats coming from the east and the west and the south and the north, is certainly Hezbollah. That's the threat that keeps Israeli generals up at night, even after October 7th.
All right, thank you. Now, we have a question from Edward Lipson, who asks, if Israel completes the operations in the Gaza and neither the hostages nor Sinwar are located, how would these operations proceed?
Well, probably sort of direct operations based on intelligence. They'll go in as they have done to rescue live hostages, sometimes dead hostages, the bodies. It's been doing that sometimes successfully, other times unsuccessfully, which obviously we don't hear about as much throughout the war. But it will still have to clean up certain areas even after Rafah, and it will continue its intelligence operations until it finds the hostages, if there is no deal, obviously, and until it finds Sinwar. Perhaps they're in the same place. That's what has been suggested by many, in some tunnel, perhaps under Khan Yunis. But those sort of operations are ongoing and certainly will continue in the absence of some sort of hostage deal.
All right, thank you. Now, here's a big question. It's from Stuart Broad, who says, Avigdor Lieberman reports today that Iran plans an all-out attack on Israel with its allies within the next 2 years once it develops its first nuclear weapons. Should Israel do what it can now to destroy the nuclear sites, since it seems that the Biden administration will not do anything to slow their nuclear process?
Well, we can either answer that should or will. I'll answer the second part. It probably won't, especially as it's, as your previous question indicated, Israel is stretched. Its army is stretched. It needs to call up tens of thousands of reservists. These are people who have maybe even been fighting in Gaza for months and they've only just returned to normality, to life, to their job, to the economy. And now they're being caught up again for a number of months. So to also do an attack in Iran, not necessarily you need tens of thousands of soldiers for an attack in Iran. Obviously, it's more of an Air Force operation, but still there will then be a response and then a response to the response. And then you're basically fighting on another front. And one can imagine all the proxies, whether in Iraq, Yemen, Syria, elsewhere, will certainly be highly engaged. And then Israel is fighting seriously on multiple fronts. So at this point in time, Israel will be focusing at the moment on Gaza, probably soon in the north, but it wants to try and deal with each of these threats one by one. I'm sure that the intelligence of what Iran is doing on its nuclear weapons program is ongoing, and if they see any opportunities to halt it, maybe through cyber, maybe through other means, as has been suggested in the past, but I do not see a direct frontal attack from Israel into Iran while it's still trying to fight in Gaza and possibly in the north, perhaps soon.
All right. Now, we had an article by MEF writing fellow Zvi Hauser, and he effectively wrote about how the Palestinian Authority and Hamas are fighting a two-front war against Israel, and that Hamas is launching a physical assault while the Palestinian Authority is taking a legal political assault on Israel with the international courts and the international community. It's also true, it's been said that if there were in fact elections in the West Bank tomorrow, that it's very likely that Hamas would win. In that event, hypothetically, what would that look like if Hamas did win? Would the operations continue on a similar front like that?
Well, first of all, for Hamas to win, you first of all have to have elections. And for that to happen, you need Mahmoud Abbas to allow elections. Now, he simply has not allowed elections. What is it now, going on 17 years, not at any level, not the presidential, not at the parliamentary, not at the regional. And one of the reasons is because he knows Hamas will win. So that will not necessarily change. Hamas could come into some sort of power sharing agreement, very much within the Palestinian Authority, subordinate to the Palestinian Authority. That's what's being discussed probably in China in a number of weeks. But that's probably the only way it's going to come in, because simply elections will not be called any time soon. But it is clear that the Palestinian Authority are not sitting back and just waiting for Hamas to take the credit for attacking Israel. As you said, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, are attacking Israel diplomatically, politically, legally. It is now officially requested to join the South African case against Israel, the ICJ, which shows that it is basically now a major front against Israel on the international stage. Israel is certainly, on the one hand, trying to punish the PA or trying to pressure it to remain out, clearly without much success. There is talk of halting more funds to the Palestinian Authority, but there's tremendous international pressure to transfer these funds because there is the threat, as there always is, whenever Israel refuses to pass over some of the funds, that the Palestinian Authority will collapse, and then it will be anarchy, and then Hamas will take over. This is the threat that Israel hears again and again from the international community, which usually means that they have to prop up the PA. So that probably will continue for the foreseeable future, because again, it doesn't necessarily, it has to look for where it can, get some gains from the international community, chiefly the US. And if it means that it allows them more in their fight against Hamas and Hezbollah, but they have to give a little bit against the PA, that's certainly the calculation that Israeli leadership will make at this point.
Right. Well, thank you. We have unfortunately run out of time and reached the end of our podcast. Thank you again, Ashley, for joining us. It's always a pleasure hearing your updates.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout for our weekly podcast offerings email coming out over the weekend. We thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.